Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Bethany Servin, and I work in marketing here at UsableNet. And I have with us today our main speaker, Chris Toumaya. And today's presentation is a live demonstration, Shift Accessibility Left with Smarter Automated Testing. This webinar is brought to you by UsableNet, a recognized leader in accessibility and digital inclusion. I'll hand it off to Chris. He'll get us started.
I hope everyone's having a great day. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar, and welcome. Today we're really going to be speaking about how to shift accessibility left with smarter automated testing. Kind of excited to guide you through the evolving legal landscape of accessibility and how UsableNet and automated testing can help you manage risk with smarter integrated testing. So for those unfamiliar with UsableNet, we've been a leader in the digital accessibility space for more than 25 years. We pioneered early in authoring testing tools and continued to collaborate with major accessibility organizations. Today, we support over 1,000 different companies across various sectors, helping them create inclusive digital experiences. A lot of our clients fall in the retail, hospitality, and travel, technology, education, financial services, and healthcare fields. But we do our best to cover any and all things digital experience. Today's agenda, here's what we'll cover. First, we're going to take a quick look at the mid-year legal trends in accessibility. We'll cover new regulations, including the EAA and updates to the ADA. And then I'm going to show you how to reduce legal risk using a structured accessibility testing strategy. That's gonna include a live demo of our UsableNet Aqua testing platform. And then we'll wrap it up with key takeaways and do my best to leave some time for Q&A. All right, so part one, digital accessibility and the current legal landscape. I guess we could start with kind of where things stand today. In the US, we're on pace for a record-breaking year. We're estimating around 5,000 lawsuits under the ADA Title III. The majority of these are filed in just 3 states. That's New York, California, and Florida. Obviously, it's not limited to those, but over 80% of the cases are driven by just 10 plaintiff firms. Meanwhile, Title II enforcement for public entities begins in April 2026 for the larger populations and April 2027 for the smaller ones. So I'm going to go through some of these in just a sec. And then in Europe, of course, the EAA deadline was June 2025. We're already starting to see a lot of activity there. Just this month, French advocacy groups issued warnings to major retailers. So when we kind of speak to the current legal landscape and regulations, there's just a lot of things at play that I think everyone needs to consider and just be aware of. Um, in ADA Title III, that's the U.S. private sector, 25,000 plus lawsuits have been filed since 2018. Kind of mentioned that most of those are coming from the same plaintiff firms and they're really concentrated in specific states. But when we talk about, risk and how to prevent risk, we try to avoid these third-party tools and platforms that can trigger risk. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. ADA Title II, that's our U.S. public sector. And I think it was early last year when the ADA Title II was amended to include digital accessibility requirements. Public sector, public entities must conform to WCAG 2.1 AA. And one note on that, I think some people don't consider is that vendors serving public universities, local governments, and agencies must also ensure conformance. And then, of course, the most recent is the EAA. the European Accessibility Act. So, though that deadline went into effect June 2025, compliance is based on EN 301549. We always recommend testing against the most up-to-date WCAG 2.2 AA standard. So there's really a ton of similarities, and that's what a lot of these compliance requirements are based on. Um, when we speak about the EAA, non-compliance risks include fines, public lawsuits, and market exclusion. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, first actions in July, the French advocacy groups issued legal warnings to 4 major retailers. So, of course, we're monitoring that closely. We're going to see what the outcome is going to be there. But lots of things at play in our space. So, what are some factors that put you at risk? What are certain characteristics make companies more likely to be targeted? First is high brand recognition, especially if you're in retail. Well-known brands in France, like I mentioned, were already sent formal EAA notices. In the US, any size company under ADA Title III is, at risk. But we know for a while we saw these big brands kind of get ahead of these, but now we're starting to see lawsuits against larger brands grow in 2025. Having physical retail and public facing locations, as well as online, is a huge factor, especially in Florida. Um, and then, of course, it's 2025. So a lot of our websites have complex functionality, dynamic functionality. So anything that's a little bit more complicated just requires a little bit more of, you know, accessibility implementation and testing. So having these complex features on a site definitely increases risk. And most commonly, I think everyone should know, accessibility statements extremely important for just being proactive, providing users a resource should they need help. And then I think one of the biggest factors that put websites and digital properties at risk is using third-party widgets for accessibility. Okay, move on. So how do we use an accessibility testing tool to reduce legal risk? Um, well, we know automated testing is a really good first step. We start with automated testing to catch the issues that are most commonly flagged in lawsuits. Um, these usually include your most popular pages, your global elements, your headers, your footers, your navigation, all of your core templates. When we think about like a e-commerce retail site, making sure that that key user experience is included in all testing, and there's like an automated scheduled cadence to testing that kind of lines up with release cycles and code deployments and marketing updates, things like that. So automated testing is a really great first step. We know that that's how plaintiffs, you know, look for targets on the internet. Anyone can run an automated test, so it's really important to make sure that those results come back positive. The next step is, of course, manual testing. Manual testing is truly the only way to capture 100% of all, WCAG criteria and ensure usability. Um, we know that 2.1 is the standards most plaintiffs look at when we're talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. But we always recommend testing against the most up-to-date standards, which at this time is WCAG 2.2. So some requirements like the Title II requires conformance to WCAG 2.1. I think Section 508 is WCAG 2.0, but it's better to be safe than sorry, and really to just future-proof your digital properties and your brand by just testing for the most up-to-date standards. So we start with the automated testing, manually test your global elements and key elements, and then we do manual, we recommend manual reviews of all of your pages and templates to ensure full accessibility. It's imperative that we verify usability with screen reader users, keyboard only users, and members from the disability community. And then, of course, the final step is just routinely testing, fixing, and verifying for ongoing conformance. It's one thing to be aware of your issues or accessibility issues. It's another to get a site to an accessible or compliant state. But the most important thing is keeping it that way, and that takes routine maintenance. So next, I'm gonna kind of jump in. I want to leave as much time as possible for the demo. Um, so we're gonna be demoing UsableNet's Aqua platform. It's a complete accessibility testing solution. It combines automated and manual testing tools, and really it integrates directly with a team's workflows and makes documentation simple. It allows you to test against all WCAG levels, including automated, issues we can reliably find through automation, and automated tests, as well as guided manual testing. Aqua lets you schedule scans, um, and really lets you just build a reliable process around accessibility compliance. If there's a key takeaway, that's the biggest thing, is having a reliable process for accessibility testing that fits in your, development lifecycle. Sooner we can implement testing, the better it is, for everyone. It's usually cheaper to, catch issues in the beginning, or as soon as possible, so you can fix as you're developing. We always talk about trying to be proactive instead of reactive. So this is a, a key feature of Aqua, and I'll show you how we can um, how that integrates. All right, so here I'm on our Aqua platform. Everything kind of starts in the suites. A suite is basically like the central hub for arranging your web accessibility testing process. Here you can see I have different suites set up, but you can think of these as different ways to organize your domains, your products. If you have multiple teams working on different things, suites is an easy way to just organize everything. For demo today, I've already set up the this training and demo suite, so I'm just gonna use that. But within a suite, you have the ability to configure scope. And this is in the form of flows and pages. This kind of enables you to effortlessly create and run tests. We kind of talked earlier about how websites are pretty complex and dynamic. It's 2025. I feel like they're getting crazier and crazier with all the different functionalities that you can have in a web-based browser. Um, Most accessibility testing tools really test a static page or a collection of pages, maybe a component or specific content. But what about dynamic forms? What about dynamic interactions like adding or removing a product from a cart? Maybe like a pop-up for, marketing emails, or even like a booking engine like form for like an airline or a car rental. That's where our flows come in. Um, Flows is just a really powerful way to record the different interactions on a website, and test those interactions. So I'm going to start by just creating a new flow. I'm going to show what the results look like, but I really just want everyone to understand how easy it is to set up a test and then execute a test and then digest and look at the results. So that's starting at step one here. So when I create a new flow, I have a few different options of how I can capture the initial URL. So for this, I'm just going to start with like a URL. And I have a demo site here called Dress Ally that we're going to use. So create the name, webinar test 3, put our starting URL. And then we can actually choose what kind of device we want Aqua to kind of emulate. So, we have in this case, it's the Chrome browser on a desktop. But if, say, you want to test your mobile views or a tablet view, or just if you want to test the responsiveness of your site, Aqua lets you kind of set this up and really test in a robust way. If I scroll down, there's tons of different options for connection, not super important for this. But there's a really, really cool way to test things like a login or those complex forms, or say a CAPTCHA. This is in the form of the on-the-fly requests. Say there's a step that requires a login or a CAPTCHA, you can actually set up a recipient to get notified when Aqua interacts with that step. So you can actually fill out that form and get past a login or get past a CAPTCHA or some other dynamic functionality or that requires user input. For the purposes of this demo, I don't need to set that up, but I think that's like such a cool feature that not a lot of testing tools provide. Um, Next, and this is the coolest part about Aqua, is we could start a new recording. So when I click this button, it's going to take that initial URL that I entered. And what Aqua's doing is it's basically taking a DOM or a front end capture of the website URL that I put in. In the case of Dress Ally here, you could see right away there's an initial pop-up for the newsletter. And this is where the recorded steps come in. As I make interactions with the different features on this site or the different functionalities, so I'm going to close this pop-up. You could see all of my steps are going to start getting recorded here in this timeline section on the right-hand side. So, now the first step was closing that pop-up. Next step, let's go ahead and navigate to a product page. And all these different steps are getting recorded here. So in the case of like an e-commerce site, I can safe to say that the core user experience is navigating to different products, adding them to the cart, and getting to the checkout or to the actual cart. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate that here. Let's go ahead and increase the quantity by 1. And then we'll add this to cart. And then we'll do one more step. Let's actually open up this pop-up here and let's view our cart. And now all of my steps for this test or this user flow have been recorded. I mentioned before, Aqua is extremely robust. So one really awesome feature is you can actually go into each of these steps and edit them. And let's go back to that initial one. So this pop-up, we know that pop-ups are typically tied to cookies. So the first time I visit a site, a pop-up might appear, but the next time I visit, it might not appear. I can actually mark this, I can edit this step and mark this as optional so that there won't be issues in any future tests if I rerun this test or if I set up a scheduled testing cadence. If this pop-up doesn't appear, Aqua knows that this is an optional step as I update this action, and it'll continue the test. So it won't accidentally fail or it won't, run into an issue where it couldn't identify this step and it'll continue the test. So once I have everything recorded here, I can save my recording. All of my steps are listed here, and then I can just create my user flow. And now when I go back to my suite overview, all of my user flows are listed here. Page collection is set up the same way. You could just put in static pages, or you could do a collection of pages, or you could do like an entire website, crawl to do to scan every single site page on your site. So lots of different ways you could just set up your scope. But once you have your flows or your pages set up, that's when we move into the actual accessibility test. And we can create a new accessibility test here. We're going to name it Webinar Demo 3. I've done like 4 of these because I was nervous about this webinar. So I'm just stacking up the webinar demos here. But as I'm in this new test, there's a lot of different options for actually running this test. One of the greatest features is the Aqua rule sets. Here we have tons of different default rule sets that you can test against. So you can test against different WCAG guidelines. You could test against single A, double A. If you're testing and just trying to comply to Title II, you can test just for the WCAG 2.1. Of course, we recommend the most up-to-date WCAG 2.2 double A. But for whatever reason, there's a ton of customization here if you want to adjust what you're testing against. One partner that I work with has their marketing team set up every time they update their banners. They just run a specific test that captures alt text, for example, or link purpose to make sure that they didn't create those types of issues. They have that rule set saved and it automatically runs every time. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to do WCAG 2.2 auto only. And then next really cool feature is our saved reviews. Aqua is extremely smart where it can actually compare your current tests to past tests. If I enable this feature, it can really streamline your evaluation process by allowing you to reuse saved site components. So you can go into Aqua and actually identify your header and your footer and your navigation landmarks. So that way it'll only report on those issues once. Or if you have this saved reviews feature toggled, it won't report on past accessibility issues that haven't been fixed yet. So that way you're not creating duplicate issues between new tests. And one of the best most applicable ways this is used is when we have this saved reviews toggled, it'll only report on new issues on pages. So if I was testing this page last week, and I tested again this week, it'll only report on new issues created. So that way we're not bloating our findings. All right. And then last but not least, here's where we kind of pick our scope. So you could pick the user flows that we created. Webinar test 3 was the one I just made. You could pick pages that you've saved. And then you could set up email notifications to let me know once this test is complete. And then you could choose what kind of reporting you want. So this defaults to our accessibility conformance summary, which is a high-level overview of the findings, really great for stakeholders and compliance teams and legal teams. I'm going to show you what that looks like right after this. And then an accessibility details report. But if we select more reports, there's tons of different, options. My absolute favorite is the accessibility Jira source file. This will output all of the results in a CSV file that's really easy to import into Jira. But we also have native integrations into Jira and Azure DevOps, and even like Playwright and Selenium and Jenkins that I'm going to get into a little bit later in our demo. So for this demo, we're just going to stick with the default. I can create my accessibility test. And once I've got this all set up, it seems pretty complicated, but it's really straightforward once you do it once. Now I can run my test, but I can also schedule tests. So I can schedule when I want this test to start. I can schedule the execution. So do I want to do this once a week, twice a month, once a month, however many times, and how many number of executions. And then you can just create that schedule. So we're going to go ahead and just run this for now, and we can get into what the findings look like. Once you hit run, you'll get a progress bar that'll kind of dynamically update. But since I knew I was doing this webinar, I already have some tests ran that we can just jump right into. So once I click into one of these tests, this is where it's going to show me my overview and the data results. For this specific test, you could see the success criteria passed and failed. And there's 36 success criteria that are pending review. This is a key feature of Aqua because Aqua has capabilities to help you guide you through the issues that require manual validation. When we speak about accessibility, really about 30% or so of the success criteria, I think it's 19 success criteria, can reliably be tested through automation alone. But Aqua lets you test for the remaining 36, and then it'll actually show you in the results how to manually test for those and validate them. So as I kind of scroll down here, I'm trying to pick all the data results. Aqua spits out a ally score which is kind of a measure of the overall quality of your code. This is really great for benchmarking, especially as you run, weekly, monthly tests. You obviously want to make sure your score goes up. You could see the specific number of issues in the actual test that we ran. So in this case, there's 494 issues that the Aqua platform caught, and there's 1,500 issues that require a manual check. Like I said, Aqua gives you all the steps to kind of manually validate these issues. Dress Ally, by the way, is a demo site that we've purposely created with more accessibility issues than a site normally has. So these are very inflated numbers. And then last but not least, there's the conformance, which I kind of went through already. Now we can get to the actual, the bread and butter of the Aqua platform. So we've done, the test setup, we've picked our user flow, we've ran the type of test that we wanted, we've set up a scheduled cadence. So what do the results actually look like? And how does Aqua make, shifting accessibility left very easy? Starts with our executive summary. This is a high level review of what our test found. If I go to the conformance, you could see the pass fail of each success criteria. The gray ones are the ones that require a manual check that Aqua will help guide us through. You get, your ally score, our WCAG success criteria, and these are all very interactive. You could see you can see specific success criteria that failed, how many need a manual check, etc. So this is a really great high-level summary for those stakeholders, your compliance teams, legal teams, product managers, to kind of just benchmark and measure where things are as we, do these Aqua tests. My favorite, KPI here, and there's a lot of them, but my favorite is the issue concentration by severity and complexity. So we take all of the individual findings and we categorize them by high, medium, and low severity. High severity issues are typically blockers, things that are almost completely inaccessible for users, whereas low severity issues are typically things that are just a little bit more difficult or confusing to user understand. But we take it a step further and we categorize these by how hard or easy they are to actually fix. So when we look inside of the results in the next page, each issue is categorized by, is this easy to fix, hard to fix, or average? And is it high severity, medium, or low severity? So when we get a report, when we get automated reporting, it's really important to be able to categorize things and filter results and organize them in an intelligent and digestible way so that way we can create a remediation plan. And then, we got lots of other ways to organize the data. We even filter issues by or categorize them by responsibility. So we've been in this business for 25 years. We know how websites are built, how they work, and we can categorize the individual issues by which internal teams or would typically be responsible for these issues. So in this case, you could see a development team is responsible for 339 of the issues found, whereas a design team might be responsible for about 155 of these. And tons of other reporting metrics and ways to just kind of digest this data. So next is our actual findings. So we switch over to this review tab, and here is where really the results live. Similar to when we did the initial recording of the user flow, when we spit out all of our findings, the individual issues are going to be listed here on the right-hand side. There's this visualization. So this is a similar DOM capture of the website that was tested. There is, if I click into a specific issue, it's going to visually highlight on this DOM representation of what element is creating this issue. So you can visually see this. But more importantly, you can actually look at the code and you can see exactly what element taken directly from whatever site you're testing is actually causing this issue. So not enough contrast for this specific issue. Um, so you have a visual indication, you have the code snippet directly from the site. You could see all of the computed styles related to this actual element. And then a really cool feature is the assistive technology preview. I'm going to go into this in just a little bit, but once we have the results, once we have the DOM capture, Aqua can actually show you what the assistive technologies like screen readers and different things actually output. So for some of our more advanced users, this is a really great way to start manually checking some issues and seeing how your website interacts with screen readers, for example, or other assistive technologies. I'm going to get into that in just a sec, but I really want to touch on some of the individual findings. So all those are listed here on the right. There's a really great way to filter in however way you'd like to make this digestible for you. Um, we could filter by the success WCAG standard, so single A or double A. Like I mentioned, I like filtering by severity. I want to make sure I knock out all of my high severity issues first. These are the blockers. And then, let's say easy complexity. If I'm fixing high severity issues that are really easy to fix, very quickly and making a positive impact to the site. And then it takes, those 500 issues and kind of brings them down to just 45 issues, which is a much more, manageable workload here. Let's take a look at a couple of these issues. If I view this individual issue, there's a few different tabs here to kind of help me understand what's going on. This first one's the information tab. Aqua lets me actually categorize these issues for internal teams. So, when we first run a report, they're all going to be marked as needs fixed. But if I'm a product manager or if I'm a QA team and I'm going through this actual the findings, I can say, okay, well, maybe this one I reviewed and we're not going to fix this one just yet. So I can actually mark this as reviewed. This is okay. And then whoever's kind of looking at the findings can see that this was reviewed. It's okay. We don't need to worry about this right now. And then kind of tying it back to when we set up these tests, if this is marked as reviewed okay, and I have those saved reviewed um, functionality saved when I create the test, it actually won't flag this again as an issue. It'll just keep it here, so there won't be duplicates. I know it sounds a little bit confusing, but it just really helps it really helps organize your tests, especially as you're running, monthly or weekly or, any kind of scheduled tests. Um, there's review status, so you can kind of, filter this further. The tagged element here is cited, so it's really easy for a developer or engineer to come in here and see exactly which element's creating is getting tagged here. But the real value here is the description. In the description tab, we're going to tell you exactly what the failure is. We're going to tell you and your teams, what are the user needs here. This is a great training and just resource tool here, just to understand the rationale of, what is the success criteria that is uh, being failed, and then, what types of users is this impacting. There's also a WCAG reference for all of these issues. So if you wanted to learn more about each individual success criteria, there's tons of resources. So this really becomes like a training and guidance for not only understanding these current issues, but really how to prevent these in the future as you're working on a website or any kind of digital property. And the most important thing is the solutions tab here. So solution is going to, take the failure and provide a recommended solution on how to fix this. This is an automated test, so it's going to be a generalized fix, but between, the code snippet here, the visualization here, the user needs, the failure, and then the insight of the solution, we've seen a ton of success with teams being able to kind of implement these fixes and fix these issues. All right. Um, Next really key feature here is the issue tracking. So this is our Jira integration. We also integrate natively with Azure DevOps. I have already set a binding up, so this is already linked to a Jira project. And in this description, it's actually pulling the key information that I want imported into Jira. So this is going to be the issue name, the severity, the complexity, which I mentioned are how I personally categorize issues, the element that's creating this issue, and then a link to this actual Aqua platform. So let's just name this test. And then this is a two-way integration. So I create this work item. This is going to open up in Jira. But as I make changes either in here or in my Jira project in the actual work item, this will update in both places. So let's see, here is the ticket I just created. Let's take a look into it. And you can see it has all the information that I needed or I set up to get imported. But really the most important thing is this Aqua URL. So whether someone has access to, Aqua or not, whether you're working with an agency, if you're working with an engineer that doesn't necessarily need full Aqua access, anybody with this link can click it and it will still take them back to Aqua so they can still get that visualization. They can still get that code snippet. They can still, learn about the issue and the failure and the actual solution, and they can actually work on this issue. And then they can, mark this as fixed or, whatever the case may be. So lots of different ways you can use this, but it's extremely robust. And, just what I'm showing in just the short amount of time doesn't even, begin to capture some of the key features and functionalities of Aqua. Um, I touched on the assistive technology previews before. I just want to kind of go quickly through this. Um, a, a lot of our more advanced users will kind of test their heading levels with this. Um, we could check your links. You can actually see, you could go through and see what are all the interactive elements on the site. Let me change the step. So I could change which step I'm getting the results for up top here. If you had different pages that you tested, those would exist right up here. So you can easily filter between the different pages or components that you tested. But here I can do a quick, like a keyboard test of these are all the interactive elements or the links on the page. And this is how they announce to assistive technology. So if I look at, certain for our more advanced users, if I see a shop now link, that might be questionable, right? That might not satisfy link purpose. Or if I go to images, I could see what the alt or the, assistive technology output would be for all of these images. And for all of my accessibility experts out there, tons of images with the name wish list is definitely not great. So this is something where I can actually come in here. It's probably already an issue in Aqua, but if I notice something like this with the assistive technology preview, I can actually create a new issue. I can title it here, inappropriate alt text wish list. I can pick the, success criteria that this impacts, needs fixed. This is, let's say this is a medium severity issue. This is easy to fix. We should to go in there and adjust the alt text. I can assign who, which responsibility this is. And then I can create this issue. And now I have, a new issue here that, our team can address. Right. So I kind of went pretty in depth about, what some of the functionalities in here. What about for teams that don't necessarily need this whole entire robust platform? What if I just need to do a quick single page test? What can I do here? Well, Aqua has our native integrations with, Selenium Playwright and Jenkins. So we really try to get into your development lifecycle as early as possible. So as you're making, as your engineers and developers and designers are creating new um, features or testing new code, we can get in there right away and start testing them. All of that links to Aqua, so it'll create, results and reporting based on that. But we also have an Aqua extension, which I quickly want to go through before we run out of time. This is great for just testing single pages. This is great for giving to, your development teams as, they're launching new things on the site or on your web properties. I can hit test. You could, pick your rule set here. You could choose to, test a specific frame, but the same results that would spit out in the actual Aqua platform, you get the same results here. You could see exactly, what issues you need to fix. If I had chosen to do the manual to test for the manual issues as well, it would populate those findings here, and it would give me guidance on how to actually validate and test those. And then here, let's go ahead and just kind of tab through what these issues are. And you can see same way it's highlighted. We have our code snippet here. We have our issue description with the solution. So just a really simplified kind of light version of Aqua here to really be able to just test as soon as possible. Um, there's tons of more features that I'd love to like get into, but with respect to time, I'm gonna stop here and let's see. All right, here we go. How does Aqua fit into automated testing? Well, it integrates with Jenkins, Selenium, Playwright, Jira, Azure DevOps. We'll try to integrate accessibility and testing into your SDLC. Schedule automated testing to run with code deployments, content releases, or any other testing cadence that you'd like. Benchmark WCAG compliance over time with clear KPIs and historical data. Generate developer-friendly reports, monitor progress, and maintain accessibility. One last thing that I didn't get into was there's a whole, reporting and dashboard that I just did not do well with time here that, I'd be happy to show on another demo or if anyone wants to follow up here. But the biggest takeaway is Aqua isn't just a testing platform. It's really like a connective tissue that brings accessibility into every stage of your product lifecycle. And it can support a variety of different teams from start to finish. Yep. Key takeaways, expecting around five. Yeah, I'll just let everyone read this, but I guess I'll open it up to last minute questions. If there's anything I can't answer, I'm happy to, shoot me an email or, I'll work with Bethany to answer anything that comes up.
So the first one from Ashley, can these issues then be sent to Jira or is it just the whole report that goes into Jira? So a question about the Jira integration.
Yeah, so the both. So we can definitely do the issue tracking through the individual issues. So those, I think I demoed that where I had the issue tracking set up, and you can just create a ticket. You just link it to a project, and it'll create individual tickets. And then we do have a Jira source, like source file report that we provide as part of the reporting anytime you set up a test. And that you can bulk import issues into Jira.
Okay, and we have a second Jira question that I don't quite understand, so I'm not sure if you already answered it, Chris, but is there integration with Jira Data Center or only cloud?
Yes, let me just double check. Yeah, so our Jira integrations include cloud integration and yeah, data center too. Sorry, I just have to double check. I didn't want to misspeak.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then, um, is there any documentation around accessibility of this tool for completely blind individuals in the accessibility field? I think this is, I don't want to misspeak.
Yeah, I would have to look for documentation, but I know that our Aqua platform is fully accessible. It's something we keep, we're proud of that we constantly are testing. And as we roll out updates, we ensure accessibility, through user testing and, of course, manual and automated testing. So I know we always tell people it's accessible. I just have to find the documentation that backs that up.
Yeah, we have here at UsableNet, we have members of the disability community that do testing for us. So, but yeah, we'll locate the documentation for that. And then there's another question. How can we handle a SSO login in the flow while recording?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you actually set up a flow for testing, there's a option for on-the-fly requests. So that's going to be exactly for things like logins or filling out like a CAPTCHA or something that requires user input. And when the Aqua test comes to that part of the test, it'll notify whoever you've set up as the recipient to handle that login. And I think the way it works is it'll actually open up Aqua for you. It'll have you log in the actual recorded step, and then it'll continue its test.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close today's webinar.